Hello and welcome to another edition of Making a Difference. My name is Kim Scott Meller and I'm the interviewer and the MC for this edition. Making a Difference is an opportunity for us to profile those positive contributions that are made by individuals to the field of education in the North Shire and Manchester area, contributions of their time, talent, and energies. My guest for today is Kim Tait, published author and poet, screenwriter, and playwright. She recently published her first novel called Inertia. Kim, it's wonderful to have you with us on Making a Difference today. I'd like to start off, Kim, by talking a little bit about when you knew that you were a writer. There were times in my life when I knew I wanted to be a performer. There were times when I knew I wanted to be an educator. I can think back of those specific times. I can identify exactly when that little light went on and said, this is something that you should pursue. Tell me about that time for you as a writer.
In determining when the moment that I decided I would be a writer, that's kind of a little bit difficult. I think I remember the exact moment I understood that I loved writing and that it was deeply a part of me. And I was 8, and I wrote a poem on, I think what I was able to find was a paper plate. We were camping, and I was sitting by a stream. Just that moving water was an inspiration, and I wrote there. And I wrote my first little poem. My parents still have that plate. And I just knew the way that it came to me, the way that those words arrived, the response that I received from other people to it. I was such a pleaser as a child especially, but I can't say that I've doffed that inclination. But it meant something to me, and I really felt like it was something that I would always do. In terms of knowing when I would become, knowing that I would be a writer, I think it had a lot to do just over time believing that I was one, and probably had a lot to do with my parents always pretty much telling me that whatever I want to be, I can be, and encouraging me in everything that I did. So it wasn't until college that I published my first poem when I was 18. It was funny, I submitted it, at the encouragement of a professor, and I had the very first thing I ever submitted, it was published, and it was selected by guest editor Rodolfo Anaya, which was just, and I thought, well, this is easy, but of course it wasn't. And thereafter there were lots of rejections, but also enough acceptances to keep me doing it. And I think the more of those smaller publications, poems and articles and things, the more I realized I wanted to write something big, something that would be sustained over a long period of time, and that would encapsulate more of who I was, and also give me an opportunity to build characters and story in a way that was a little bit more substantial than what I had done up to that point. That came later, though.
As following this process, and the way I heard it from you, is it was very evolutionary, and you had a substantial amount of support through your career and guidance, and people that believed in you, both within your family and outside your family, which I think is very important. But the other impression I'm receiving from you, Kim, is that it's a non-ending type of evolution too, that you are still evolving as a writer, as a poet, as a screenwriter, as a playwright, as an educator as well. Is that you find that to be very true?
Definitely, yeah, and that's something too that for my students I really try to integrate into the way that I instruct them in terms of their writing. We're all growing and learning as a writer, and today you're in my classroom and you've got my ear and you've got my heart, so let's grow you as a writer. Let's take this bit of your evolution and see where we can go with it. So yeah, great, you can jot off something that might get you an A. Well, let's make it better. Let's make it more of you. Let's make it stronger. Let's make it more fully developed. And so it is that idea that wherever I get you as a student, or wherever I am, it's just an awareness of where you're at and where you can go from there. So yeah, I think that evolution is really important.
In my observations of writing in the educational system, both public and private and independent, is a lot of time is spent on the mechanics of writing. And that is important, I believe, to a point. But then you can also turn off a spirit, a writing soul, if you push too much of the mechanics and not encourage the, like you were mentioning earlier, the inner joy of writing, the evolutionary process that you followed. Where do you feel mechanics in writing should begin and where should it end? Not in terms of a specific grade, not in terms of, of the age, but in terms of the writing spirit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm loving what I'm saying now is that as early as, in the primary grades, teachers are presenting the writing as a process and beginning with pre-writing and drafting and then later editing and revising and publishing. I love that they're using that word publishing to mean sharing. Like the thing is ready to share as a work of art or argument or maybe both, And the idea that for kids, we're working always toward that. But when we first put our thoughts down, when we first put our sentiments on the page, there's something special too. But they might not be the same thing as what you would consider a published work. And so I think early on in getting the kids to just write, I wouldn't red pen anybody. Well, my kids tease me, my students tease me because I will only use a purple pen, which is maybe silly, but I just think there's that association. We see a red pen a lot, maybe less now than when I was a kid, but that red pen meant you're not doing it right. That was like the map of your mistake and the level to which you were making mistakes. And it's such a conundrum for teachers because they have to find that balance. I mean, we can't just say, just go for it, be a writer and knock yourself out and the other stuff will come later. It can't be that loosey-goosey, I mean, there's definitely mechanics. There are standards of writing that they have to master. You look at Picasso's early works, obviously different genre, different art form entirely, but he mastered form. I mean, those are very realistic sort of paintings. Something, I took my boys to a museum in Spain a couple of years ago, and they were just shocked by what he did when he was 15, but he first showed the world, like, I can do this. I can master what's respected and what's established, and what these structures that are really valued and important. And then he could experiment. Same thing with Virginia Woolf, who's by far one of my favorite writers. And she, before she strung together these sentences that were intended to reflect human consciousness and human thought, using a syndeton, dropping all those little ands and connecting words and just stringing them together with commas beautifully. She talked about, letting the atoms fall as they may.
Yes,
I quote
yes.
that in my book. She crafted really tightly wound, grammatically sound sentences and mastered that. And then she could show that she could experiment a little bit. Then I think what that really has to do with is then we trusted her, right, as an audience.
Yes, yes.
And so that's part of it too. As with children, this early part where you're pre-writing and you're writing and you're free writing, and it really is for yourself. And you can decide out of 10 pieces, maybe only one you want to take it over here and bring it through all those steps to be a published piece. That's fine. All of this stuff, every intermediate step, all of those 10 pieces, plus that one that you take out here and you say, that's my publication, that's what I'm sharing, all of those things have value. But to sort of express that and really make sure that kids understand that is important, so that early on, second grade, third grade, we're learning about where commas go. I mean, my son had I think he had, I think, the oldest teacher in the district. She was 70-something and just quite a tennis player. And he just admired her. He would say, I had to peel him away from her at the end of the school day. But she was very traditional in her presentation of grammar and correct sentence structure. And he really has it now, and now he can play a little bit. He's 10.
He has his voice.
Yeah,
and he has his voice.
And so again, it's about saying, all right, now by the time I get them, they're sophomores. Like, okay, you've learned all that. That's good. Now, it's like undoing the damage that seems a little bit inevitable in terms of their consciousness of themselves as writers. Kind of, I think, and I guess the best word for it is their fear.
Yes, yes.
Fear of being censured, not censored, but censured and judged. And so pulling that fear away, but leaving the skills that they gleaned from all of that practice and all of that, you know, instruction and correction, and saying, okay, where can we go from here? And generating a lot of stuff. This body is huge. What we decide to pull over here is much smaller, and it's because that's our purpose with it. But again, the value of this is, I really like to put a lot of emphasis there, because that's the stuff of our writing and the stuff of our lives, and what every single person has inside them. You know, not that every. Oh, go ahead.
No. What's being created, and if I'm hearing you correctly, is a safe environment for not only you as a writer, but for you as a person. I marvel. In fact, I'm tickled periodically by the fact that a lot of teachers nowadays are being trained in teacher education to do an awful lot of writing themselves. It's no longer top down. The teacher explaining to the students, this is what you should write, and then once again the red ink. Oh, tell me, I'm in a 12-step program for that red ink pen, I'll tell you. And so teachers now are in the process of, they're doing writing, they're sharing their writing with the students. They're putting themselves at risk, and they're opening themselves up to their students, who in response are going, now that doesn't make sense, can you clarify that? Good point. Good point. So it is a safe learning environment for all, Now, in your teaching, have you noticed, are there certain things in the students' writing that are encouraging to you or frustrating that you've seen over your years of teaching, in their style of writing, in their subject of writing?
The only thing that gets frustrating, and I see it more as a challenge, is when kids come in and they are really closed. That red penning just took them to the point of really not being able to find their way back into their creative self, and to a place of feeling, like you said, safe to get those things onto the page. And so the challenge really comes then in helping them let go of some of that. I have all kinds of funny little tricks and strategies and things, you know, including, you know, just dumping a bunch of objects on the table and just saying, okay, pick one, and you come up here, and I make them stand around, and I make them look at them for a long time. You got to hold it in your hand. Hold it in your hand for a while before you make your choice, you know, like connect with that thing, and maybe it's a corncob pipe, maybe it's a deck of cards, maybe it's a spool of thread, you know, and just wait until there's something that you have to say about that thing. Usually they are associations, and they write the story about their grandmother, you know, mending their shorts when they tore them on the fence or whatever. But they'll find the thing and take it, and then just say, and just go. And you can't stop writing for 10 minutes or 12 minutes or whatever it is. And you can't, if you stop having something to say, then you write that. I have nothing to say, I have nothing to say, I have nothing to say. After 4, 5, 6 times of that, something will come to you, and you'll keep going and just get it down. And I think after, and that, the bit that you talked about with teachers writing with them, that's so important, because after a couple of times of hearing what I write too, you know, always, I think that sharing is such an important part of that early phase. And we say, yeah, we're writing and it's just for ourselves, we're not polishing and bringing it out here for publication, but these things, it's important to also be willing to share. It's an act of trust, first of all, in a writing community, which as I've grown older, I've come to value more and more, because I was always, it's a solitary act. I just do my thing, and that's that. But the more that I began to share writing and also interact with other people's writing, the more I felt supported and like I was doing something that was really valid and that had way, you know, what people said about how it could develop, that had value to me. And so I do that with my students. So, you know, the more times they hear me writing something, and then I say, well, then I stopped and I changed subject. So here now is what I wrote, blah, 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 and I keep going. And I don't have anything to say, I don't have anything to say, I don't have anything to say, and they're looking at each other. But sure, you know, yeah, every single writer has those moments, and every single, you know, you just move in. And what's here on the page, that's what I got the first time. It's good, it has value, and if 3 people say they remember something from it, I'm definitely going to keep that, put a little circle around it. Maybe that'll be the only thing I use from that for my polished piece, you know, the seed for something else. But it's that, it's a really involved, interactive process in the classroom, and I think the more that we can get kids sharing with each other, it amazes me when they share how you know, kids that seem sort of reserved will just spill, and they'll come to tears, you know, and the other kids will be quiet and just kind of have this reverence, and because it is so special, that kind of sharing, and it does mean, I'm sharing with you, it does mean I trust you, and I trust you with my language, I trust you with my sentiment, and I think you deserve to hear what I have to say.
Oh, I think of all the people that have been turned away from writing because they have not been in an environment where they are allowed to, you write as long as you want to.
Right.
Here's this period of time, but you write as long as you want to. How long did it take me, and how many times did I have to work with students whose response to me was, all right, Mr. Miller, how many sentences? And how many paragraphs?
That's frustrating.
But you know, once I started to model my own writing and do my writing, and those times when they would reach the end and they could come up with any more ideas, and they were what they would call, I'm finished, and they'd look up and they'd look at me, and I'd be sitting there and I'd be looking up, and then I'd return to my writing. They would do the same thing. Oh, there is something that I might have forgotten.
Right.
Now, do you do peer editing at all?
I do use it.
How successful is that, or when do you find that necessary to use?
Well, I wouldn't say I ever find it necessary.
All right.
But I think it is useful in getting them. It's another way of sharing their work, first of all. But I never let them write on each other's pages. They'll have a forum where they can kind of write down their comments, what they remember, what they loved, questions. I usually have them respond to each other in terms of questions, because if a student asks a question about my writing, if a student asks a question about another student's writing and they go, that's exactly the question I wanted them to have, great, that's an affirmation. And if it's a question I think I answered, then I know to go back and kind of revisit what I've got on the page, because something's not happening that I wanted to have happen. And if it's a question that clearly shows, then I know that they're way off base. Then I know I haven't been clear. Those kinds of things. I think questions are just the absolute best way for kids to respond to each other's writing. And if they just ask a question like, what happens to him when he gets older? Does he ever get to become a doctor? And again, as a writer, I might go, yeah, that's what I want him to wonder. I want him to wonder that, and that's a question I don't have to answer as a writer, but I want that curiosity piqued. So that's really the way that I use it in terms of assigning, evaluating. I don't think it's that. I haven't found a way to do it that I think is that useful. They're too sensitive to each other, and they're too, But the other thing too, I say, look, they're showing it to you because they want to know what. And again, I think the questions help them to pose what might otherwise appear as criticisms in a gentle way, and then the writer can determine what they need to do from that.
It's funny because I see an awful lot of that. You know how people will say they talk the talk but they don't walk the walk? You do both. I've seen that specifically in your novel, Inertia. And thank you so much for gracing me with the opportunity of reading it. As a reader, I like to have the freedom of saying to myself, there are a lot of things that I don't agree with, but that's my luxury. But on the other hand, it's something that I could not put down. I really enjoyed the fact that you have a hero and a shero. The first one is Pat Snyder. This was a quote about her. Her passion is for those who have been denied voice through poverty and other misfortunes. Have you heard that before? So you have seen that evident in her poetry writing?
Yeah, and particularly in her work with Amherst writers and artists, and she runs workshops and which attract just writers, writing enthusiasts, educators, at all levels, and she really is just about empowering those people who come to her workshops to take those practices out and share that and get more and more people to write and feel good about what they write. She takes her program into prisons and
That's what I read. Isn't that
it's
she's still alive and continues to do this.
Yeah.
The nice thing that I really enjoy about who you are as an author is the continuity in terms of your heroes and sheroes, Pat being your shero, but also Wallace Stevens, a major American modernist poet who spent most of his life as a lawyer. says, reality is the product of the imagination as it shapes the world. Reality is an activity, not a static object. And in your book, I have highlighted so many instances when I have seen that, I see that in truth. You have such a way of painting a picture that makes me sit back and I understand exactly what I need to know about the character or the context in which it's playing. Let me share something. This is from your book, Inertia. I had closed my eyes and held very still so as not to disturb her, as if she were a dragonfly and might dart away at any sudden move. I collected her with my breath, held her with my desperate intention for a single protracted minute. Then she was gone, and I could not be sure I had not conjured that feeling myself, manufactured the dream of her presence with my wayward desire. Do you realize where that took me when I read that? And that's one out of many, Kim. What do you attribute that skill or that art of being able to enrich the text in such a way for the reader?
I think I really don't know where a lot of the language comes from. I just sit and I just go, and sometimes I surprise myself with what I write down, but I really think it has a lot to do with honoring that idea of Virginia Woolf's, that we should just let the atoms fall as they may, and let the language and the sentiments sort of collect themselves on the page, and I guess maybe that's where part of that passion for my students comes from too, just like, gosh, if you can just take away the stuff that holds you back, the stuff that gives you that fear, then what comes out is always going to be unique. There's nothing new under the sun, right? But we can always express things in new ways. And I think that if each person can get to the purity of that expression, the purity of their impressions of life, and find some way to sort of streamline that from the brain to the page, then what comes out is always going to be unique and is always going to be enchanting to other people, because what's really pure and what really represents a person is always going to be, like I said, unique and special. And so
that is the perfect word, enchanting, Kim, because as with many novels, it's chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. You do have those, and you also have part 1, part 2, but then you start each chapter with the character's name. And what I find very interesting, especially towards the end, and I won't give the story away, but towards the end, when the two characters depart, one goes to New Zealand and the other one stays in Hawaii, is there's an incident that occurs, and you give the one character's perspective of that incident, and then you give the other character's perspective of that incident. So as a reader, I'm reading this and I'm going, I never thought of that. So that's what the other character was seeing through their eyes relative to that incident.
Right.
Did you plan it? How did you plan that, or did that also just come out of the art of writing?
Yeah, I think.
And your love of writing.
Yeah, well, because I wrote it first as a screenplay, there were some special challenges in bringing it to the novel genre, but I knew, I adapted it from the screenplay to the stage, and I saw these fabulous students of mine in Switzerland produce it and act it out, and it was just gorgeous, and I thought, I want all that to happen on the page, and I think I can, but there were certain things that couldn't be, it just wasn't enough. It was just, perception is your reality, right? And so I couldn't have only one character presenting those things. The myriad of impressions and layers of reality, if you will, I just think a single narrator can't quite get there. It's a fascinating study to read something from a single narrator because you're in their head, and that's completely valid. I'm sure I'll write that way too, my next novel. But for this, I wanted to show both Jake and Angela because their relationship was so important, and their relationship to one another, and also their relationship to the shared experiences that they'd had, and yeah, I just think it added a different dimension. Virginia Woolf played around with doing that too, and also, of course, William Faulkner, but he's a little bit more famous for it. But she did the same, and I'm fascinated with that idea of the multiple narratives and how that illuminates the situation in a unique way.
Kim, it's been an honor and a pleasure to have you on our show, Making a Difference.
Thank
And I
you.
do see that you do make a difference in your life and the life that you share with your family, your students, and with the public at large. I'm very proud of you and your book, Inertia, which is available at Northshire here in Manchester. And thank you for making a difference not only here in the Northshire, Manchester area, but nationally and hopefully internationally. It's been an honor.
Thank you.
And thank you very much, Kim.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. We hope to see you at our next show, Making a Difference, where we will profile our next guest. Once again, people that make a difference and make positive contributions to the field of education here in the Northshire and Manchester area. Until next time, I'm Kim Scott Miller, your host.